I'm drinking water.
Pussies.
That boy, Dan. I would if I didn't stay up till 1 o'clock drinking bourbon last night.
Oh, same.
And I've got a big bourbon party tonight, too.
Nice.
Don't worry. Everyone always knows I'm the champion of this podcast anyways.
Mm-hmm.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm hungover.
I'm Dan.
And I am also hungover, Jake.
Raise your glass to hangovers, boys.
Let's go.
Cheers.
Oh, is that a Yeti and a coffee mug?
Today we are going to play a game. Not like Saw, unfortunately.
Oh.
But Dan heard about this game from the Master Distiller Whiskey Acres, Rob. So go ahead and explain it, Dan. Then we can just jump
I guess
in.
it's not really a game, but more of a thought experiment. So a while ago, Rob was at an event with the guys from Found North and a few other distilleries. And that night when they were out drinking, they came up with this idea of the world is going to end, or all the distilleries in the world are going to be closed down tomorrow, except for the 6 that you choose. Since they were all distillers, they couldn't choose their own distillery. So basically, that led to the thought and discussion of what 6 distilleries would you save in the world if you could save only 6 and the rest were going to be bye-bye forever. So he asked that to me at work, and I had a couple that came to mind right away, but it was harder than I thought. So I think today, with you guys being hungover, that way you don't need to drink that much or at all. Weak people. We'll go through the 6 that we would save, some of the reasons why we would save them, and then we will put our collective little brain power together to come up with our 6 Bourbon Matters saved distilleries lists. So
Right.
that will be our thought experiment today.
So I've got a couple clarifying questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, it is worldwide.
Worldwide
We established
distilleries.
that.
Spoiler alert, none of mine are from outside of America because fuck other countries. This is America.
You would, Dan.
We're called Bourbon Matters. I'm wearing a Bourbon Matters t-shirt. This is America, folks.
And then my other question is, when we say distillery, are we talking about...
They have to make the alcohol. They have to be distilling it.
Okay.
So no blenders, because if they're just blending other people's whiskey and that distillery is not around anymore, they have no jobs anyways.
Barrel craft was on my list. Can I not use barrel craft?
You cannot use barrel craft. They do not distill.
Wow. That would have been... I mean, technically they're a distillery. They have a DSP number.
Do they make their own alcohol? Do they make their own juice for their whiskey?
As of now, they don't, but I don't know. Who knows? That could change.
It's going to be tough for them to make whiskey or be one of the 6 distilleries left if they can't make any alcohol.
They do a hell of a job blending it.
They do a hell of a job blending it, but if no one's making it for them, then it's going to be tough.
But see, I thought they were a perfect candidate because they have obviously high proof, which is what we like, and you'll get plenty of different finishes to be able to, widen up the options that we're going to have if we're only drinking from 6 distilleries.
Well, you can
but
do
I guess
that,
I can
you can only
substitute
pick
them
4.
out.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I can't leave it to just 4.
Yeah.
And where did these rules come from, Dan?
These were from the guys from Found North.
Okay.
Because when we talk about distilleries at work, they are people that make alcohol.
All right, so I'll switch them out for a true curveball.
And my only other question is, how do you want to treat conglomerates?
I.e., like, are you talking like Diageo and stuff like that, or
yeah, or like
they're
more
single...
closely like more like Beam Suntory.
So
Like,
you
do
would,
you
I
have
would
to
think you
pick
would just
the
pick like Jim
location?
Beam. Yeah.
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 Okay.
It's not like all the everything they own.
Yeah. Okay.
Those
All
would be
right.
the
Since
rules.
Dan is so confident in his list, why don't
I'm
you
not
start?
confident. It's just I don't care that much for other whiskey outside of America. The Whistle Pig is also not on my list. Shocker, I know.
Is there any rye distilleries on your list? Or
I
you're
mean,
just going
there's
to
people
drink
that make
bourbon
rye.
for the rest
There's
of your
people
life?
that make rye on here easily.
All right, go ahead.
So
Let's hear what you got.
a couple of them, I'll give a little description of the reason why I have some of these on here. The one I had at the top of the list would be Jim Beam, which we just kind of talked about. I like their product line from top to bottom. I can't say top to bottom. Not a big Jim Beam fan of just your normal $20 bottle of Jim Beam, but
Every product serves a purpose.
that's right. In college, Jim Beam is what got me drunk a lot, so it did serve its purpose back in the day. I then have Maker's Mark as more of a sentimental reason because Maker's Mark is the reason that I got into whiskey. I feel that if I was trying to have a little bit of variation, and I realized I went with all American distilleries, so I don't have much variation. But the reason I picked Makers is I'm a huge wheat fan, and I know that they make a damn good wheated whiskey, and I want to make sure that good wheated whiskeys move on.
Mm-hmm.
I then had Buffalo Trace. Don't need to spend a ton of time on that. I also enjoy the history of Buffalo Trace. They've been around forever. Why would I want to kill one of the oldest distilleries in America?
Hater. Excuse me.
Cheater? Or tater. I thought it said cheater. I'm like, how is Buffalo? It's not breaking any of my rules. Another distillery I picked, they're large. They make really good product lines, and I don't know if I could live without mellow corn, so I'm going to have Heaven Hill on my list. I next went with someone that we've talked about a lot. I really love their product line, and it's a master distiller we'd want to keep around, so I went with Old Elk. Just that way we keep Greg Metzg with a job. And then finally, just because I know their product line better than another distillery I almost put on my list, I'm sure I'm going to get some hate for this, but I have MGP on my list of top 5. Just because if there's only 6 distilleries in the world, someone's going to need to make a shit ton of whiskey, and they can make a shit ton of whiskey. Well, I thought about going with some Scotch and Irish distilleries, but I don't like any of them enough to put on the list over the ones that I picked for what I want to drink for the rest of my life. So I kicked all those people off.
We are pretty similar. We share a few. My list and your list.
I figured I'm more about the ones that you don't share with me because I'm going to tell you how you're wrong. But I don't know. It's not a very diverse list. I get that. I'm not a very diverse drinker.
No, you're not.
So I like the things that I like, and I stick to them. I'm the crotchety old man syndrome. I understand it. I'm going to lean into that, but that's what I went with. And you guys your lists are not going to be correct.
No, this is an opinionated game.
No, there's winners and losers and everything.
I'll share my list just because it's kind of piggybacking a bit off of Dan's. I think 3 or 4 of them are the same, but my first thing that I put down and the first thing that came to mind was also Jim Beam. How can you not? It's like classic Kentucky bourbon, massive distillery, lots of whiskey being produced, and all the different craft brands inside the Jim Beam portfolio: Old Grandad, Knob Creek, Baker's, Booker's. There's plenty of variety there in order to keep me busy. And then Buffalo Trace also on the list. Kind of.
Sorry, Jake did to me.
Kind of more for a sentimental reason as well. That was the first distillery that I went down and visited in Kentucky. I will never forget that weekend driving down with my dad and my brother, not really knowing anything what to expect because I'd never been down to Kentucky. But our first stop was Buffalo Trace. We picked a barrel there, and I'll never forget that experience. And obviously, they make a wide portfolio of great bourbon. The next one, I guess I'll say MGP as well. So those are the three that we had similar. I also agree they produce a lot of whiskey, and they also produce a lot of really good rye whiskey, which I don't really have a dominant rye producer on my list. So I'd have to say MGP for all the different mash bills and I guess just for volume and quality, they'd make my list. Now, here's where it gets a little different. Bardstown Bourbon Company, new distillery, pretty much made my list because of the technology that they have and the ability to press a couple buttons and flip from 50 different mash bills, 100 different mash bills, and just produce a lot of wide range of variety. What do you think about that one, Dan?
What do I think about that one?
Yeah.
That
Said
one's
you're.
wrong.
I got a nod from Jake, so I think he kind of agrees with that one.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about putting Bardstown on my list. The only reason I didn't is because I was not overwhelmed with either of the bourbons in the Origin series. I really enjoyed the rye, but yeah, the two bourbons in the Origin series did not live up to what I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed the.
And that's actually their distillate.
Yeah, I enjoyed the Origins. I mean, they didn't blow me away, but I think it's a good start and kind of shows they're headed in the right direction. But then also, obviously, I don't know if they'll be able to source and do like the Discovery series. If there's only 6 distilleries, it might get a little boring, but also kind of interesting to see what they do with that. So I think that would be kind of cool. So then my fifth one, which this is probably a huge curveball. Well, my next two are probably big curveballs. But Starlight is going to replace Barrel Craft.
Okay.
And I mainly picked Starlight because of all their unique finishes. I think they'd be able to keep it interesting. They do a lot of weird finishes: rum finish, cigar finish with the Amberana, port, sherry. I mean, I could go on and on and on about how many different finishes they do. And they also kind of operate like a small craft distillery. They're very hands-on with everything. And most of my other distilleries are obviously big, larger distilleries. So I want to throw someone a little smaller in there, but also has the volume to kind of produce, many different things to keep it interesting. And if you know me, you know this really isn't too big of a curveball, but Ardbeg is going to make the list because I do crave some peaty, smoky Scotch every once in a while, and Ardbeg does do quite a bit of different unique finishes and releases as well, and that would be enough to crave my peat or fix my peat craving whenever that comes about.
So I was trying to put on a smaller craft distillery that instead of having all the big guys on there. So I do like Havaseed and Starlight on the list. I will fight tooth and nail over Bardstown as a no. One, I don't like the stuff that they're producing. Two, I'm not a big fan of some of the people that have investments in the company. That's just a personal vendetta. And three, I laughed when you said that, like, so the one thing with Bardstown that I will say, and I will still say that that's my favorite distillery we went to in terms of how the distillery works. When we talked the other episode about investment in whiskey, you were talking about how everything was so much greater when you had to run up and change this valve and then run down the stairs and change this valve.
Yeah.
And now you're putting a company on here that presses a button to make a match.
I know it's a little contradicting, and that point was just kind of to show that they don't make it like they used to. But that was part of the thing that drew me to them for this because they distill for so many different brands. So keeping Bardstown Bourbon Company alive is keeping 50 to 100 and probably more brands alive. And I want to,
It's almost like another MGP on
yeah,
the
I want to
list.
drink a variety of whiskey. I don't want to be stuck to 50 whiskeys if we just have 6 of the big main distilleries that are just producing their stuff. But I thought Bardstown Bourbon Company was a great fit just for how many brands they're keeping alive by doing this. And I will also say honorable mentions, Maker's Mark. The only reason why I probably didn't pick them, it's one of my favorite distilleries to visit. I love their products. I love all the wood finishing series. But I just think it lacks a little bit of variety if I'm only going to have 6 distilleries. Even though you can get pretty interesting stuff out of the different combinations with their barrel program, which is probably why they are very close to making my list. And my other one would be Castle and Key, mainly just for how beautiful the grounds are and because they produce some really good gin and vodka and liqueurs that will also add to the variety. I think that's like the only thing I'm lacking on my list is some other spirits, even though I know Buffalo Trace.
You got vodka. You got vodka.
Yeah, Buffalo Trace's vodka. I'm sure, I don't know, Starlight probably produces, I know they produce like a bunch of brandies and they probably produce some kind of gin. Maybe that they just sell at the gift shop. I don't know. Or MGP can probably do that for me.
Yeah, I'll still fight on Bardstown because again, we have MGP. You had MGP on your list, so you already have a big mass producer, so you don't really need 2 big mass producers. I'll let
Variety,
you,
Dan.
like
Variety.
when we get down to the nitty gritty, when we're trying to put our 6 together, if I need to vote for Bardstown to get it on the list to make the final 6, I'll only do that if you introduce yourself every episode saying, "I'm Jake and I'm a hypocrite," and then I'll vote for it. And then I'll
Dan,
vote for it.
that's totally wrong. That's totally wrong. I've got good reasons for both ways here. I'm actually more for Bardstown now that I know you're that much against it.
My favorite thing about Bardstown is like when Jake and me when Jake R and me started first getting into whiskey, we were buying some of the Bardstown stuff, and then you find out one of the people that has money in the company that me and Jake both don't like. And he's like, "Oh, fuck that! I'm never buying Bardstown again." And then every month he has a new Bardstown bottle on his shelf. I'm like, "What the hell?"
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We can put all that. When I was making this list, I didn't no politics. Like I put all that aside and just focused on the.
I put everything.
Yeah,
in
I know
thought.
you did.
I put everything because I wanted to do some historical stuff. I wanted to do some craft stuff, and then at the end of the day, I said no. I'm just going to go with big boys that make a lot of whiskey that I like. Mm-hmm. So, but you're wrong on Bardstown. The other ones I can see. I highlighted Bardstown in red.
All right. Well, hold your questions till the end because I've got some that you're going to be upset about.
I think you put too much
number one
thought into this, but let's hear it.
Number 1, Heaven Hill. They make some of my favorite whiskey. I think everybody agrees that they're a great distillery and they have volume capability. Number 2, Beam. We already talked that to death. You know, they've got all kinds of variety. Number 3, Castle and Key. I believe that their rye is like top-notch elite status. And I think their whiskey will be getting there in the next few years. Their bourbon will be getting there in the next few years. Keeping them around, I think, is worth a spot on the list. I'm going to come back to number 4 because it's going to, I think, give Dan a heart attack. But
it's Bardstown Bourbon Company, isn't it?
No, it's not.
If you had Bardstown Bourbon Company on your list, then we're going to have the introduction of each episode of, "Hi, welcome to Never Matters. I'm Jake. I'm a hypocrite. I'm Dan. I'm Jake. I'm also a hypocrite."
So my number 5 is Hard Truth.
Ooh.
Specifically for their rye. The sweet mash rye is like my all-time favorite. It's so good.
And we haven't even seen what they're capable of yet.
Right. And then number 6, I originally had Old Elk. I actually had MGP and Old Elk that I subbed Hard Truth, and then I decided to put in Middleton only because they're like the Irish version of MGP, and I like my Irish whiskey. So looping back to number 4, I want Jack Daniels on the list.
Ooh. That is, I actually approve of that, and I'm surprised I didn't think of that, although I don't think it would make my list.
Yeah, I'm not upset about that at all. We've talked about it a lot. I really like their bonded. I don't like a lot of their other products. When I was going through, they were a name that popped up right off the bat when I was trying to think of old historic distilleries I want to see live on. So I'm not having a heart attack about that. I mean, it's not Bardstown Bourbon Company, which should never be survive any apocalypse style thing.
Which, by the way, this is the exact opposite of what he was saying while we were there. He was like, "Wow, this place is so cool. This place has everything."
I to this day said it was my favorite distillery that we went to.
I know, and
I'm just
so it can't be that far off the list if it's your favorite distillery that you went to. Did you eat there? Their food is amazing.
No.
See, if you ate there, you would approve.
We went to Talbot's instead. Went to a historic place to eat. And I'm sure I'd love their food. I have nothing wrong with the experience of going to Bardstown. I think it's a great experience. And for me, it stuck out the most from our trip because we went to 6 distilleries and 5 of them were about the exact same. And Bardstown was not even close to the same. But I can tour there and not like their products or not want them to survive an apocalypse style setting where I vote for them to live or die.
All right, so Dan's taking the cutthroat approach on this decision making.
Yeah, no, it's like if this actually happened and we got to be the 6 people that picked, I would totally Ari Gold paintball style walk into distilleries like an Entourage and just blast people with a paintball. You're fired. That's how I just walk. That's what I do to Bardstown.
You'd personally launch the nukes.
Yeah. No, I'd press that button in a heartbeat. But
all right,
no, I don't. It's not that I hate Bardstown. I just don't. I don't think, especially when we're talking about MGPs and stuff like that going on. I just didn't see a need for them.
Yeah.
Variety, Dan. Right, more variety, more brands. Go create your own bourbon at Bardstown Bourbon Company. Dan's Bourbon.
So easy, I think all 3 of us have Beam, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Jim Beam definitely makes the cut
there.
Yeah, Jim Beam is in because all 3 of us had Jim Beam. Where we overlapped, 2 of us had Buffalo Trace, 2 of us had MGP, 2 of us had Heaven Hill.
Yeah.
I think we got to do MGP and Heaven Hill. I mean, Heaven Hill would probably be like an honorable mention for me. And then,
I think MGP's...
Heaven Hill would be an honorable mention for you that didn't make your honorable mention list?
Yes. It was in my thoughts when I was putting this list together.
I just love the fact that you guys are a little cloudy this morning and I'm drinking whiskey and just get to shit all over you guys.
You're not, though. How much whiskey have you been drinking?
Just this. It's going to be a tough day today, I have a feeling. So,
isn't that an MGP product?
This is an MGP product. That's why I picked it. Well, we keep saying MGP. I got to eventually convince myself to say Ross and Squibb. But that's probably never going to happen.
Yeah, no. They'll forever be MGP. It's like the Sears Tower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, recap. We got Beam, MGP, and Heaven Hill.
Right.
We've got 3 more slots to fill.
The only other one that had multiple picks was Buffalo Trace. But I'm not saying we have to have that on the list. I'm just going to say that's the only one we had doubles on.
I'd be willing to vote for Buffalo Trace if we can get Castle and Key or Jack.
The one thing I would like to see on here is a craft distillery make it. So the craft distillers we have are Starlight, Hard's Truth, and I don't think Castle and Key would technically be. I can throw Castle and Key on that list. If I was looking between Starlight and Hard Truth, I'd go Starlight. I do love Hard Truth's rye. I wasn't huge on their bourbon.
Hard Truth, we just don't really know yet because everything they've put out, besides those 35 barrels they distilled in Kentucky, everything's been 2 or 3 years old, and it's tasted great.
Right.
But I don't think I've even tasted any of their bourbon before that they've distilled. Because they did a lot of sourcing with Dickel and MGP.
That's right, it was sourced. Yeah.
But I don't like Hard Truth is a great one to have on the list, but I wouldn't be confident just having 6 distilleries, knowing that I've only tasted 2 or 3 year old product from them.
Yeah,
and I would probably go with Castle and Key or Starlight. And I don't know, it's tough because obviously Castle and Key, we all love. It's one of the most beautiful distilleries. We all love their rye. We all love their gin. But we don't have anything on the list that does a lot of different finishes. And I think we'd want to have the option of drinking something that's finished once in a while.
Yeah.
I'm good with Starlight.
Yeah, I was probably leaning towards Starlight as well. My biggest problem is I don't like Castle and Key's bourbon that much right now. So I will go with Starlight on the list. So we're up to 4.
Yep.
We have 2 more slots. The ones that I have that aren't picked.
Wait, so what do we have? We have Beam, we have Starlight, we have MGP,
we have Beam,
and we have
Heaven
Hill.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that are on my list.
I was going to say, I'm still voting Buffalo Trace for the 5th one. I just think there's too much history there. And it's just such a wide variety of products with only having 3 mash bills. They're just a great example of classic bourbon on where you store the barrel in the rick house is what it's going to turn into. And I just think that's super cool. But
the sticking point we're at now is Jake said if we had Buffalo Trace, we'd have to have Castle and Key or Jack Daniels on the list, and we just wiped Castle and Key off. And I don't know if I want Jack Daniels on that final list.
I'd be good with the Jack.
You got to represent Tennessee.
What else would the? I mean,
so the ones that aren't on the list right now, for the ones let's not put Buffalo Trace on there quite yet, because I have the 3 that I have that aren't on the list right now are Buffalo, Maker's Mark, and Old Elk. Jake, you have Buffalo Trace, Ardbeg, and I disqualified Bardstown.
I think Bardstown should make the list.
My game, my rules. And then
Jake, come on, stick with me here, just so we can shut Dan up.
The ones we've. If you make a life-changing decision just to spite me, you've already lost.
I mean,
I am not a person worth spiting. Like, I'm too big of an idiot for you to like spite the rest of the world just because.
I know Jake would be. Jake would be down to do it.
Oh, yeah, I know, but then you have to live with your consequences.
Hey, I'm good with that.
When old JB's ruler of the free world.
Put that aside. Let's just focus on the whiskey.
No, because it's part of the distillery. I will not. Jake, the ones we haven't kicked off from years are Jack Daniels and Middleton.
Yeah.
I do think it would be important to have an overseas distillery on here. Now, Ardbeg would destroy the rest of the peat in the world. So, I mean, it depends on if you like peat or not. Eventually, they're going to destroy it all.
I mean, that's just kind of like a personal thing. If you guys don't like peat, I know. I mean, Jake, you're not really a huge fan, right?
I mean, I don't mind it, but I could go the rest of my life without it.
Yeah, because that was just more of like a personal thing. I just crave some peat once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
The one Scotch distillery I thought about for a while before I realized I don't like Scotch that much was, and people are probably going to, again, hate me for saying this, McKellen is if you want to go with someone that's been doing it forever. you'd have McKellen or, God forbid, Johnny Walker.
They don't distill anything,
Johnny
though,
Walker.
right?
They're a blending house.
That's right.
McAllen, I thought about real quick and shut him down real quick. They would be on there just because they are kind of like the king of Scotch. And that's really it. I mean, there's plenty of better tasting Scotches that are a lot cheaper. And I don't know. It's just
so. Just by saying that, you're basically ruling out Jack Daniel's. Then.
Why is that?
Why?
On your theory of kind of the originators, the big name, but not necessarily a big fan of the product. That's very similar to Jack Daniels.
Yeah, but Jack is affordable and good.
Yeah, I'm a fan. If you get a barrel proof single barrel from Jack, that will compete with any Stag Junior release. The bonded is great. The triple mash I really enjoy. You don't like rye, Dan. It's probably too complex for your palate. It blends single malt rye and bourbon.
That's what it is. Yeah. That's what it is.
There's too much going on.
Definitely what it is. I'm not drinking a high rye bourbon right now.
The Jack Daniel's rye is pretty damn good too.
Oh yeah, I mean, we just for the first time experienced their barrel proof rye. The world experienced that for the first time a year or two ago, and it's looked at as like one of the best ryes out there.
Yeah.
If you wanted to go peaty, I'm trying to accommodate you, Jake, since you just came up with that awful Bardstown.
Well, I was thinking
I'm trying to be more accommodating in other ways. I was thinking
Bardstown can probably make a peated mash.
Yeah, and it probably tastes like shit. I was one that I thought of just because when I was trying to think of Scotch and Irish distilleries, one that I liked that was peaty. They're not old. They don't have a lot of history. Would be Torvig.
I thought about them. Mm-hmm.
And that would be considered more of a craft distillery from overseas.
I'd vote to put them on the list.
If we did this podcast 2 weeks from now, when I get back from Torvig, I guarantee they'd probably be on my list. But I don't know. I thought about them briefly and didn't, only because they're so young. We haven't tasted much from them yet. We don't really know where they're going to be 6 years from now. And the more I think about it, I actually think I can get by without a peated Scotch, even though obviously I'd be fine with it because American single malts taking off. Jim Beam already has an American single malt released. Buffalo Trace is experimenting with peated malt. So it's only a matter of time before one of these distilleries produces something peated that can get me by.
All right, so you don't know about peat, so I'm going to cross Ardbeg off the list.
Middleton's not a bad idea because they are a huge distillery and they kind of are like an MGP of Irish whiskey. I'm just not a huge fan of Irish whiskey.
Same. It's funny too because I've gone from not liking Scotch that much and liking Irish better to liking Speyside Scotch and not liking Irish nearly as much as Speyside.
I mean, I like Irish whiskey. I enjoy it. I definitely could go without it. It's not something that I need in my portfolio.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we don't need a global representative on this list,
I don't know. Maybe we should challenge ourselves a little bit more to try and think of something.
Yeah, I was going to say,
we know some listeners are going to be upset if we have all American distilleries.
Yeah. The only other one I was thinking of as a foreign representative was Filey Bay because I was really impressed by them. Really,
that'd be the same as Torvig, though, still a newer thing.
Yeah, but Filey Bay had more options to taste from that they distilled, and I thought every single one that they put out was really good. But still, I don't know. I just don't think they're like big enough to. All right, we're just gonna. And I don't know. I mean, they are a farm distillery too, and we don't have a farm distillery on here.
Yeah.
Dan, would you?
What's going to end up happening is Dan is just going to negotiate Whiskey Acres onto the list.
That's what I was going to ask him. No. Like, what does he feel about that?
No. The rule that they came up with, you couldn't save your own distillery.
But would you think about them if that wasn't the rule?
I don't, man, as much as I love working there and as much as I love what we're doing and the stuff we're coming out with, it's again the same thing. It's a really young distillery. And if we're going to be stuck with 6 people, I want to have to try and grow and hopefully they figure it out because then my other options are only 5 more distilleries to drink from. I think I'd rather have someone that's been somewhat established or has gone through mass expansion because their product sold like crazy. So,
Well,
Wilderness Trail could be a possibility if I want to look like that. Is someone that's they're not much younger, they're not much older than we are at Whiskey Acres. They're not a farm distillery.
We even talked about Wild Turkey.
Wild Turkey were on my original list, and I took them off. Amazing stuff, but I just don't think there's enough like variety that I love.
Mm-hmm. So if we want to look at scotches, the biggest scotch distilleries.
Let me just touch on Whiskey Acres real quick. The only reason why I thought about Whiskey Acres, and they didn't make my notable mentions list, but because their knowledge on corn. And I thought, okay, these guys can teach these other distilleries more about corn. Maybe they can just do more growing instead of just focusing on distilling. But yeah, I think definitely too small and just haven't seen enough from them yet to be the final 6.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's like all these big. I'm guessing like the majority of the big distilleries have pretty good relationship with the farmers they work with. They're just not growing their own grain.
True, but none of them like use different types of corns for different whiskeys like Whiskey Acres does. Mm-hmm. So that was like what drew me to Whiskey Acres.
Yeah. If we're looking at scotch, just going by amount produced, your top 9, Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, Macallan, Bowmore, Glenfarclas, which I know Rob from Whiskey Acres will love if they were on the list, Highland Park, Ardbeg, Aberlour, and Kilchoman.
Aberlour is a good one. Any of those
worth... It's, like I said, Macallan would be kind of the...
So boring, because it's such a boring answer.
I haven't tried enough of the other ones to know their full profile. I mean, I tried Kilchoman when they were in at Gold Eagle. I just don't drink enough scotch to throw them on the list.
Yeah, I almost think we just shouldn't have just all American.
I'm totally fine with that. So,
all right, I guess I'm fine with that too.
We're going to go that route. So if we're going to go all American.
So what's our final options then? We got Maker's Mark, Castle and Key, and Bardstown Bourbon Company.
Buffalo Trace.
It's too bad
on your list. Buffalo Trace, Castle and Key.
It's too bad Gold Eagle doesn't distill. We could put them on the list.
You wouldn't be able to pick it. You wouldn't be able to pick it.
Could.
You work there.
I think Buffalo Trace has to go on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I just think there's too much history there, and again, just what they do with 3 mash bills is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So Wild Turkey, we're saying no on. We're gonna take Middleton off the list. Ones that have been mentioned either in the top 6 or, as Andro mentions, are both Maker's Mark and Old Elk.
I wouldn't be upset about Maker's Mark.
I mean, I also have a barrel with my name on it there because I am an ambassador for them.
Yeah, everyone has that, Dan.
Not everyone does have that.
Everyone I know has that.
Because some people didn't know about it, and I'm mad that they don't give me Christmas gifts anymore. So I actually don't care if they're not on there because I didn't get my $2 Christmas gift this year.
Take them off the list.
Didn't get your socks or your playing cards.
My playing cards, the puzzle, and I forget the other one.
They could see makers could keep it interesting with the private select program. Obviously, there's 1,001 combinations, so that's a lot of different whiskeys to taste. And we have seen that they do taste very different from one another. But yeah, the only reason I think I didn't put them on is just because one mash bill.
Yeah.
but I wouldn't be upset. It's one of my favorite distilleries to go to. It's one of my favorite weeded bourbons to drink.
I don't feel comfortable committing to an all weeded bourbon distillery.
That's fair.
I knew Jake was gonna have that issue. I'm still gonna. If I was looking at mine, I would still pitch Old Elk probably above Makers. Makers is more of a sentimental thing for me. But you have a problem with Old Elk.
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't
Is it
like
because
Old
Greg
Elk.
Metz got sick and
No.
is it because Greg got sick and couldn't make it to go legal? Is that what the beef is?
I should not say that. I do like Old Elk. I love Old Elk. I don't like Old Elk on this list because I just think they're too similar to MGP. All of their stuff right now is MGP.
Sitting on 30 years of Greg Metz product, so you're kind of already getting it.
That's the only reason why I wouldn't pick Old Elk, is just because we have MGP on the list. All their barrels are from MGP, so I don't think there's really a reason that we have to put them on there.
What about? I want to say this just for people to hate me. Dickel.
Well, I was gonna say there should be a Tennessee distillery on this list, in my opinion.
Just really wanting that.
I'm still good with Jack. Well, I'm good with it.
Dickel is
Cascade Hollow.
Jack Daniels has just an absurd amount of whiskey in reserve. Dickel does too. Dickel provides whiskey to a lot of different people. I would prefer to have Jack.
I think we would lose a lot of listeners if we said Dickel was on this list.
Well, let's not say that because we don't have a lot of listeners in the first place. And if we put that on the list, we're going to have like three. And one of them is probably Jake's mom.
If we go from 60 listeners down to 30, I mean, that will be detrimental to the podcast. So I don't think we can put Dickel on the list.
I know. I was saying it more for
Vince. I'm glad someone brought it up because it had to be touched on.
I didn't realize when I was looking at some of the bigger distilleries in terms of how big their stills that they're running are. I don't know their product line the greatest, but I was surprised to see, if you want to talk about Tennessee, Nelson Greenbrier is on the list of some of the bigger distilleries in terms of still size. I didn't like their original sour mash that they have. I do love the Belle Meade. I haven't tried because they're getting rid of Belle Meade in Illinois. I think everything but Tennessee, because they have their new Nelson Greenbrier line coming out. That's very similar. I wouldn't put them above Jack if we wanted to go Tennessee, but that'd be another big one. I was shocked with how much they actually did.
So I think you convinced yourself that Jack should make the list.
If we do Tennessee.
Well, we don't have to.
The other thing
I know.
The other thing we haven't talked about is Texas. There's a lot of good distilleries in Texas.
Screw Texas.
Roberto, speaking of
Roberto left the podcast. No Texas.
He was at Garrison today. Got there at 5 a.m. for release.
What's coming out today?
He said the line was like miles long at 5 a.m.
Jeez.
It was the Laguna Madre. It's 101 proof thing. So he was there today. I don't know. I'm just not a big Texas whiskey fan. Jake, I mean, right. TX was one of your originals.
Yeah, I love TX. But it's a blend. I mean, their bourbon is excellent too. But I prefer the blends over their bourbon.
Yeah, we can throw Texas out and put Jack Daniels on the list. I don't think there's.
Dan should be clamoring for that compromise because that means Bardstown is not on the list.
Yeah,
no, Bardstown's not going to make the list. At the end of the day, this is.
I don't know, man. We can get heated here, and I think it made some pretty good points with Bardstown.
I can talk about it. I don't want to say anything bad or anything.
Why? You say bad shit all the time.
I know. Just, fair point. There were some things that when Rob and Nick were down there were down in Kentucky for a few days, they saw some things that made them scratch their head a little bit with how they were doing some of the stuff before they got to mashing, which they weren't a big fan of. So
Whatever. Bardstown was really for the ability to create many different things and give us all a lot of variety. And obviously,
and MGP wasn't.
Yeah, but Bardstown comes with 50 to 100 brands that are already established.
MGP
comes with
I know. Don't you want more variety?
I mean, if you want to go more variety, what about Middle West? Because that was the other one I thought about. I just don't know their product line that well.
Everything I've tried from Middle West has been incredible, and they are kind of emerging as like a mini MGP.
Right.
And maybe
I thought about them for a while. I just don't know their product lineup that great, so I couldn't. Or who's all using their stuff for blends, so I couldn't put them on the list for sure. But I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think we don't really know enough about them to just pick them and throw them on the list. But that kind of brings up a good point that maybe we should have like an under the radar distiller like them that produces for other distilleries and brands.
Yeah.
Especially because MGP is kind of maxing out what they can do. They're not really taking on new brands and new clients because they don't have enough whiskey right now. And now they're really getting into buying established brands that already use their whiskey. So I don't think there's a lot of room for MGP to expand, and create more products than what's already out there with other brands that are buying and blending.
Well, and that actually brings up a good point about. I'm kind of on board with finding that under the radar supplier distillery as well. But one other thing that I think is
Castle
a point
and Key
for
does that
Bardstown.
Too, yes, I want to hear it. I want to hear it, Jake.
So I think we talked about this recently, but I believe Bardstown is doubling their capacity in the near future as well, aren't they? I think they're adding a second massive column still.
It wouldn't surprise me. I haven't seen that yet, but I know like they're nonstop, just constantly building rickhouses, and everything is just getting filled as soon as they build.
Perfect. Twice as much whiskey I won't drink.
You're probably drinking a lot of their whiskey and you don't even know it.
Actually, I don't have much of the stuff that they're... Because the Green River bottle I finished.
Well, they also can't disclose like 70% of the brands that they're distilling. Nobody knows that they're distilling.
Right.
So
majority of the stuff on my shelf, I'm pretty sure where it comes from. So Jake, I'm not against Jack. We can still put it on.
No, we're talking about Bardstown here.
I know. Yeah, they're not on the list. That's all we need to
Dan's
talk about.
panicking, and he's saying he's okay with Jack because we're starting to go back to Bardstown.
Jake's against makers. Jack is a possibility. Middle West has popped up. Jake, you were a little intrigued when I said Wilderness Trail?
Well, isn't Wilderness Trail part of Wild Turkey?
No. Just the Campari.
They're still a separate
Campari,
entity?
who owns Wild Turkey, bought Wilderness Trail, so they're still very separate. They're just same owners. Wilderness Trail does a lot of distilling for other brands. And actually, we don't have a sweet mash distiller on the list. That's another point that we might want to think about.
Yeah.
And they're also the king of yeast. So I would think if you pick Wilderness Trail, that's going to come with all their yeast recipes, and they supply yeast to a lot of different strains. I should
it's a separate company.
It is,
that's
but so what? But their lab is right on property of the distillery, and you don't think you would have access to that if that one distillery kept going? The yeast is going to keep going.
Well, if that distillery closed down,
yeast would keep going.
Would still stay around. Yeah, because it's not a distillery. It's a good thought, though. I mean,
my opinion would be if we're going to add another large producer, or contract distiller to the list, I think my preference would be Castle and Key.
Yeah, I'd give it our spirit. It was funny when you talked about
they do have the added factor of the incredible gin. That I think is like a decent thing to think about.
Incredible gin, smaller, kind of crafty distillery. And yes, gorgeous grounds.
Mm-hmm. Trying to think of other people
and sweet mash
that we haven't talked about. What's funny was when you talked about yeast, the other one that came to my head was Four Roses, and I love how none of us mentioned Four Roses at all. But I'm not a big fan.
I mean, I like Four Roses, but there's not enough. Yeah, there's not enough variety. Even with the 10 different recipes, they still only have 4 products minus the barrel picks.
Yeah.
Lux
Row their product lineup isn't one of my favorites. No. So I would say
I think the real fight is Jack, Castle and Key, or Bardstown. And
I would say Jack, Castle Key, Middle West.
Dan's got to make an argument or a compromise on Bardstown.
No, I'm not making a compromise on Bardstown. I'm fine with either Jack or Castle and Key. Middle West would be kind of the outlier, but I'm fine with either one of those.
I think it's Castle and Key or Bardstown.
Castle and Key it is. All right. So
wait.
Yeah,
this is tough. I mean, this is where it would be cool if we were recording this live to just have people chime in and give some distilleries to think about, because I'm sure there's probably a couple that we're not touching on. So obviously,
what they can do
in
is
the comments,
if
you're
below,
listening, please leave some comments, and maybe on the next episode we will talk about it. If you leave something good,
yeah.
I mean, so looking at our final list then, because it's been decided, Bardstown's been thrown off. It is
who decided?
Jim Beam. I did. And I got the typed up sheet over here. It's on the typed up sheet.
All right. We can't delete it now. It's already typed up.
Yep. Typed up and highlighted. So our final list: Jim Beam, MGP, Heaven Hill, Starlight, Buffalo Trace, Castle and Key.
All right. Can you do me a favor?
I just want to say 4 of those 6 were on my list.
Can you also So what? Can you put an honorable mention section and put Bardstown Bourbon Company on the list?
No,
yes.
No,
dishonorable mention. No, it was obviously an honorable mention. Put Bardstown Bourbon Company, Maker's Mark, and Jack.
It was mentioned.
Those 3 are the 3 runners up.
We'll have honorable mentions, and that is going to be Maker's Mark,
Jack
Daniels, and then we'll have mentions.
Bardstown Bourbon Company.
Is Bardstown Bourbon.
All right, Dan typed it. That's all I care about. Dan typed it in. It made the sheet. It made Dan's sheet.
It made the mentions list. It was mentioned. I could also put all the other bourbon companies or whiskey companies we mentioned on here.
No. Those are like the 3 that actually could have made the list.
Yeah. No. One could have made the list, but then like one day after we went down to 6 distilleries, there'd only be 5 distilleries left.
Yeah. We should have.
One might accidentally have something happen to it. Oh no, some alcohol vapor went out. There's a fire that started. Oh no. So that is our list of 6 distilleries we would save. Like I started off with, all America, because everyone knows that America is the greatest thing in the world. Jim Beam, MGP, Heaven Hill, Starlight, Buffalo Trace, Castle and Key is the 6 we came together and said if there was only 6 distilleries left in the world, those would be the ones we want to keep. Overall, pretty good list. Nothing too surprising on there. Starlight's probably the biggest standout on there, but I like having it on there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting but very good choice. I think just for the variety that they bring to the table, like we talked about.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, Jake, you got your wish of you said Buffalo Trace could be on the list of either Castle and Key or Jack Daniels is on the list, and Castle and Key snuck in. Not because of their bourbon, but because of their rye and their gin.
That's how an MBA negotiates, Dan.
And because of their grounds.
Yeah.
The grounds, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. So of the places, I said Bardstown had the coolest experience. Castle and Key had the best grounds. Go to if you're down in Kentucky, I would recommend going to those over Buffalo Trace because Buffalo Trace is just too much Disneyland.
Yeah, that is.
You're going to fight with a massive line of people that are trying to get.
You're not going to get anything out of Buffalo Trace in terms of bottles, so just don't even.
Yeah.
Well, you can if you get there early in the morning, but you're going to fight with people.
Yeah, you'll fight for
some
Taylor Small Batch or Weller Special Reserve or Blanton's.
Yeah.
But actually, Buffalo Trace almost didn't make my list just because it's not really a place that I'd like to go and visit when I'm down there anymore. It used to be 5 years ago. It was amazing. But yeah, it's gotten very commercialized. It's still a really cool property to check out. If you've never, ever been there, just go there and walk the grounds. But yeah, it is a little absurd how many people line up every day to just get these tater bottles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to try and be controversial and not include them on the list.
I did too. They snuck on mine, and I felt like I couldn't not do it.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not going to put Buffalo Trace on the list, and then I was going through it. I'm like, no,
I had
Buffalo
the
Trace
same thought process.
Why? The only reason I didn't is because I knew both of you would.
Awesome. So that was kind of a little fun little thought experiment.
Got our brain,
got
our brain working for the day.
Yeah, it should help your hangovers.
Take a nap now.
I will not be taking a nap. I think I'll do a few things around the house and then continue drinking. So,
all right. Well, let's plug.
It's your cue, Jake.
Me? I thought bourbon matters.
Go ahead and plug Gold Eagle.
All right. Gold Eagle, goldeaglewine.com. Check us out on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine. Check us out on Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits. Come see us in Libertyville and pick out some good booze and visit Drew at the bar.
We got to get him on. We had 2 comments.
We do, yeah. I mean, I actually talked to him about it. He said, yeah, I would love it. It'd be a very funky episode, but why not?
Well, that'll be Jake's deck episode.
Yeah, we need a. Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know if you want that liability. There's a good chance he might fall off the deck.
he's got homework insurance. He's fine.
But we do have to come up with a really good topic for when he's on. Maybe it just can be focused.
Let Drew pick.
We can let him think about it. I just want the bar
Drew to review movies.
just life as a bartender. How he went from when I started working at Gold Eagle, he was 2 nights a week part-time cashier. And now he's full-time bartender. We didn't even have a bar when he started working at Gold Eagle. So it would kind of be cool to hear his story, how it evolved since he's been there.
Yeah.
He's worked there longer than I have.
We can do that. Let him pick the whiskey we drink that night. We'll just have a Drew episode.
Cool. The people would love it.
All right. Yeah, for sure. Bourbon Matters. You can listen to us on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can watch us on Spotify and YouTube. Leave a comment about what your top 6 distillery list would be to save in the end of the world. And subscribe, rate, click the notification bell, all those little things on every platform.
Awesome. Well, that was a fun little experiment. I'm glad Bardstown Bourbon Company is no longer going to exist, so we solved that out. Hopefully you guys get out of your hangovers today. I will try and join you in that boat tomorrow.
I'll also be in that boat tomorrow.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys.